Toyota Material Handling is now providing a factory rebate of up to $2,500 when you trade in a Toyota or a competitive unit. Now, through September 30th, 2024, trade in your forklift and get a new industry-leading Toyota forklift. This rebate applies to electric and internal combustion models. Unlock your upgrade today by visiting toyotaforklift.com. That's toyotaforklift.com, or click the link in the show notes. Welcome to this week's bonus episode of the New Warehouse podcast, which was originally broadcast live on LinkedIn last week. Now, we can't have a warehouse without getting involved in real estate. And in this conversation with Eric Zeinizer, we dive into all things warehouse real estate. Stay tuned for our conversation discussing what the current market looks like, how to decide where your next location should be, and insightful negotiation tactics for when you need a new space or you're coming up for renewal on your lease.
The New Warehouse podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
All right. This is the New Warehouse podcast live here on LinkedIn. And today we're going to be talking all about warehouse real estate. And as I mentioned in my LinkedIn post, we can't really have a warehouse without a building. So real estate becomes pretty important when it comes to warehousing in general and logistics as well. We need property to put that inventory and those trucks and all the different things that make the world move around happen and where to put those. So I'm going to be joined today by Eric Zeinizer, and he is the managing principal over at Cressa, which focuses on representing tenants and buyers exclusively. So Eric, welcome to the show today, and thanks for joining me.
Good morning, Kevin. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Definitely happy to get you on here and happy to talk about this topic. I think it's super important to understand this, and I think it's also important to get perspective from somebody who's an expert on real estate, specifically in the logistics realm, because most people are not leasing or buying a warehouse every week, right? So it's kind of a transaction that happens maybe every year, a couple years, something like that. So it's good to kind of hear the latest and get some tips as well around strategy too. So before we kind of dive into the meat of our conversation here, why don't you give us sort of a brief overview of Cressa and what it is that you're all about?
Yeah, sure. Appreciate the segue. So Cressa Corporate Real Estate Service Advisors, we were originally formed and still serve the mission and purpose of serving tenants and occupiers, as you indicated. We think it's important that there's an advocate there for end users that is working exclusively on their interests. So we never have any conflicts in our representation, which is a unique proposition. And we focus on analytics and sort of wrapping our business design and personnel strategy and how we build our business and redeploy capital all around one purpose and one vision for our business, which is to make it the absolute best for serving tenants and end users.
Great. Yeah. And I think that's super important too. And that analytics component, I think is huge as well, especially as the analytics become more and more important as we're focused on, getting closer to the customer in a lot of scenarios when it comes to fulfillment and warehousing. And those analytics can really help to understand the right location or what are some of the advantages there. And I've seen one of your analytics reports as well personally, and I could say very comprehensive and definitely helpful to guide you and understand what locations may suit you and why. But tell us a little bit about, because you mentioned they're, representing tenants and buyers exclusively. Tell us a little bit about how does that contrast from maybe some other organizations, and why is that kind of a a pro and what might be a con if an organization is
Yep.
not doing that?
Yeah, sure. So, we compete primarily with the largest full service dual agency commercial real estate brokerages. So they do a number of things. For one, they also own property, right?
Hmm.
A lot of people don't even realize that. So all the top big, commercial real estate dual agency names that everyone knows, they have investment management arms. They're your landlord in some instances.
Hmm.
They represent the developers and the landlords, and that is over 80% of their revenue.
Mm.
So on the tenant side, even if you're one of the biggest, tenants in the world, you're still going to be number, 200,
Yeah.
300, 5,000, 10,000 on the list of their customer size. So, we want to be cognizant of that. And so our clients, they don't have to have any concern about that. We're only advocating for them and we only have their interest at heart. And we don't have to, worry about, okay, well, did I show them a building that's listed by my biggest landlord client, or
Mm.
did I not do that? I don't have to worry about getting a call from a capital markets broker that has the relationship with the biggest, landlord in the world and say, hey, you got to take your guys through one of our buildings or it's a bad look for us.
Yeah.
So we only work for our client.
Mm. Yeah. And I think that's a
Yeah,
great thing. Definitely.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, having that representation and, an unbiased, I guess, approach to what you're going to show them is certainly makes the most sense. And, allows you to know as the potential tenant that you're going to see something that's really actually, the right fit or potentially the right fit for you versus, like you said, trying to check a box where, our biggest
Yeah.
landlord, wants somebody to come through, right? Because it's available. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about the market today and what it kind of currently looks like, specifically when it comes to warehouses themselves.
Yeah, sure. So, the modern market for warehouse sort of, if you kind of go back, it started to scale up with Amazon scaling up their business
Mm.
and the which was sort of the initial adoption of e-commerce. And then during COVID, it got to this crazy peak in terms of tenant demand and the need to store inventory because there was the initial, run on the shelves and all these companies and retailers, they stocked out of products,
Yeah.
manufacturers, they shipped out all their product and they couldn't get more from overseas. So they didn't have inventory, right? And
Mm.
everybody had been operating on a just-in-time model for years, right? That was like the corporate manufacturing mantra was just in time, keeps our supply chain costs low.
Yeah.
So during COVID, everyone went to the just in case model and they started building up tons of inventory and forward deploying that inventory. So it led to a couple things. A major thing is just the demand for space massively outstripped the supply. So the leasing velocity during COVID was just torrid, I guess is how I would describe it. It was like every week, like multiple big leases were getting signed in the core logistics markets in the US. We could talk about what the core logistics markets are later if you want.
Sure.
But so that led to this huge demand, right? So that led to a couple things. The rents went up quickly, very quickly and
Hmm.
steeply during COVID. The 3PLs and a lot of the transportation companies were making money hand over fist.
Yeah.
So they were able to take space aggressively and sort of lease in advance of having for sure that they were going to have whatever inventory slotted there because they knew they could just if they priced it right they were going to be able to get inventory
Mm.
from winning xyz contracts or a public warehousing model. They just knew they were going to be able to bring product in. So that's like the space market aspect of it, right?
Mm.
And then on the capital market aspect of it, it was amplified too because money was free because the discount rate was like zero.
Yeah.
So So all of the developers were, of course, incentivized to build, and the buyers, the institutional buyers of warehouses, were incentivized to buy, and the prices went way up because it's easy to hit big purchase price numbers in your underwriting
Mm.
if money is free. You're almost like you're just sort of incentivized to spend money if you're a developer or a landlord, and if you're a 3PL or a tenant, you're incentivized to like lease and just spend money because when it's free, like you're going to make money on the activities that you do. So why not
Mhm.
take free money and start to make a big profit margin? And that all sort of happened, right? So then I guess it got a little frothy. And then when the interest rate went up, it went up really quick.
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember that. It was
Oh
like
yeah.
just boom, 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 quick raises, 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 because that all the inflation that started to happen, it just it sort of registered at once.
Mm.
And everyone's like, oh crap, we got this huge inflation. Well, everybody, the Fed said, oh crap, we have this huge inflation problem. So then immediately all the assets get repriced. They're just, the value is just different because they're valued based on discounted cash flows, they're valued based on the cost of debt. So that all just changed instantly. And then a little bit slower than that has been the impact on the space market, right? Because now that companies actually have to pay for servicing their bond debt and servicing their loans, and just the overall sort of cooling effect that higher interest rates have
Mm.
on the economy writ large has impacted the consumer, and it's impacted manufacturers, it's impacted distributors, and it's impacted 3PLs. So the space demand is down and the leasing velocity is down.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to see how that happened. And I mean, I remember too as well, the interest rate just kind of like rapidly going up and up and up. And it was pretty interesting to see. And then, people kind of bragging about those low interest rates they were able to lock in back then. But I mean, I'm curious too. I mean, you mentioned there, where people move to these just in case type of model, which we heard certainly during the pandemic, and tried to get some extra inventory that normally they wouldn't have. And I heard about a lot of people trying to get either like overflow space or additional just storage space to do that. Are you seeing that inventory is now kind of going down and people aren't doing that as much, or is there
Yeah,
still like a lot of kind of overflow inventory floating around that people are trying to place?
I think it's gone down, and
Mm.
I think that they're not doing that as much.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and then you mentioned in there too some of the core logistics markets. So if we look at some of those core logistics markets, I'm curious, in today's like climate and environment right now this year, I mean, what are some like particularly hot markets right now for warehouses?
The largest markets and the most call them meaningful markets in North America are the Port of LA, Long Beach, and Inland Empire market.
Yeah.
And that covers Southern California and the Inland Empire, everything that gets basically imported on the West Coast. That's by far the largest, port area
Mm-hmm.
in terms of imports. And then on the East Coast, it's the Port of New York, New Jersey, sort of Newark plus market. And that market really is a mega market that encompasses the Lehigh Valley, which is sort
Mm-hmm.
of the Inland Empire version of the East Coast, because that's product that is coming in at Newark,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to bulk warehousing storage to Lehigh Valley on I-78, big, nice interstate. It's not that far away from Newark. And then it can get, pack, the containers get broken down, get packaged, and you can resell product, either retail or e-commerce, back into the Northeast metro area, which is 40% of the US population. So from the Lehigh Valley, within a day's truck drive, you can hit 40% of the US population and 50% of the Canadian population, actually, because so much is around that kind of Toronto GTA area. So, so the primary logistics market, biggest and primary in North America, are the Northeast and Southern California. So, it's Lehigh Valley, Newark, goes down to like Cranberry
Hmm.
and Dayton, and then down into South Jersey, and then includes also going over into like Harrisburg, which sort of serves the I-81 logistics corridor, a lot of big box retailers and stuff like that. The Toronto market is very large and
Mm.
very low vacancy, typically high rental rate growth. So these markets, have traditionally been known for just large amounts of warehousing and high rental growth, and just perennially strong demand from tenants. The Miami market's pretty strong, and land constrained. Atlanta and Savannah, but there's been more building in Atlanta. But
Mm.
the Savannah has had a lot of growth in their port volumes, and then Seattle's always been a very land constrained, strong rental growth market. Dallas, Houston, obviously big markets now, especially with Mexico becoming the power player that it is
Yeah.
in terms of how much product is being shipped up through like Brownsville and Laredo. So, that's a huge market as well. Chicago's a big market. Yeah, those are sort of some of the, like, core markets.
Mm.
Phoenix has gotten really big for West Coast distribution, has large manufacturing growth in the Phoenix market as well.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting, and obviously, shout out to New Jersey, where I'm based in South Jersey. You mentioned there, uh, and I think it's pretty interesting to see kind of these hot pockets of warehousing and where they're located. And I'm curious. I mean, from that regard, you mentioned like Inland Empire in California. There, I mean, I've been seeing where a lot of companies are going into like Nevada versus like California. I mean, are you seeing, where some of these areas that you mentioned are getting maybe a little saturated or getting a little more expensive, or maybe some other challenges there to enter into those markets, and they're becoming kind of like a secondary market to be close to that area, but not necessarily like exactly in that area?
Yeah, Nevada has become a pretty good logistics market.
Mm.
A lot of that, I think, is related to the regulatory challenges
Yeah.
for businesses in this space in Southern California. So laws around trucking and other things. In terms of the rates, they've actually eased in the Inland Empire quite a bit. Like during the fever pitch of COVID, there was sealed bidding for leases. So like,
Mm.
a landlord would have well located 100,000 square foot warehouse suite, and eight tenants would put their lease terms in the envelope and give it to the landlord, and the landlord would pick a winner, right?
Mm.
Now, there's a lot of sublease space there in the Inland Empire, so that pricing pressure for tenants is alleviated
Mm.
a lot. So, if you're at a tenant and you're looking for a nice suite to serve the West Coast, now's actually a really good time to look in the Inland Empire.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of sublease availability and a lot more flexibility from landlords because they're competing with sublease availability.
Interesting. And that sublease availability that's kind of coming, is that because people are shrinking the inventory footprint that we
Yeah.
were talking about earlier?
Yep. And then a lot of 3PLs, that they took a lot of space and it's not full anymore.
Mm.
So now if it's not full, if you're at, 33% capacity in a warehouse that used to be 100% capacity in, and you signed the lease when the rates were peak, you're probably losing money, overall on the operation in that warehouse. So you put the sublease sign up, and then you continue to try and sell into your empty space, but the margins are compressed because everybody else is doing the same thing.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. Kind of having maybe two potential options there, whether it's get more clients or find somebody as a sublease tenant. That makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense to kind of diversify in a potential way there to fill that empty space. So you mentioned 3PLs there. So I'm curious, if you look at those markets, and if somebody wanted to start a 3PL, or they were looking to, maybe take the next step in their 3PL and get a more sophisticated building or something like that. I mean, what market would you kind of suggest it would be ideal for them to start in?
A lot of users and tenants from, it's called small startup
Hmm.
to even some of the biggest companies, they often make this decision or similar decisions sort of just off gut and off the, like, kind of call it institutional knowledge
Yeah.
or whatever contextual experience. We always try to emphasize to use analytics to make this decision,
Mm.
make these decisions. That's the most important thing you can do. So, for every dollar of real estate spend that a company has in their supply chain, they have $10 of transportation cost spend
Mm.
and $5 to $7 of labor cost spend. So we use analytics, particularly we use, supply chain networking optimization software and analysis, and we'll look at where are the customers that you want to be serving or that you are serving, right?
Mm.
What port does it make sense for you to pull the product out of? And then what are the shipping lane costs and the various shipping costs, for getting the product to that port, and then for getting the product from wherever this warehouse is going to be to where those customers are that we're targeting, right?
Right.
And the software and the analytics and the programming is very sophisticated to give us that information, give us that insight, and then also quantify it for us, right? So,
Mm.
for example, if you have an existing distribution center in, call it Fontana, California, right, and you have
Yeah.
five years of term left on that lease, and then you're like, all right, I need to open an East Coast distribution center or something akin to East Coast because I need to reduce the shipping time because all my customers on the East Coast are expecting 1 2 day delivery, right?
Mm.
We could take the software and we'll plot where your customers are. We'll put in there as sort of, I guess, an independent variable that Fontana is not moving because we have 5 years of term left on the lease,
Yeah.
and it'll show us like, hey, if we put the DC here in Harrisburg at this size, or if we put the DC, in Columbus, Ohio, or we put it in Atlanta, Georgia, what's the cost? What's the impact on the cost of our total supply chain network? And what's the impact on the shipping times to all of our customers? So then we can choose, do we want to optimize it for this certain balance of shipping time and cost, or do we just want to optimize it for cost, or do we just want to optimize it for shipping time?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And I think, like you said, I mean, I'm a big data guy, so definitely a proponent for it. And I think the analytics, I mean, is such a smart way to go about it, instead of like that gut feeling, like you said, and, have some understanding of that, because it is, could be a huge impact to cost overall and operational cost,
Yeah,
not only from, just the, maybe you get a great deal on a lease or something like that, but then if all your
right.
customers are like that much farther away, like, is the
Yeah, I
total
mean, that's
cost
like
really that?
that's the
Yeah.
biggest mistake we see people make sometimes is like they kind of go into it unadvised and like, hey, but I got a great deal on the lease. And then they realize there's no labor, you know,
Yeah.
like yeah, there's a reason like the rent was super low. It's because there's the closest forklift driver lives an hour away. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's another component we put into the location selection is, okay, what's the density of labor availability for the types of people you need to employ? Forklift drivers, pickers and packers, shipping, receiving supervisor. Our analytics will tell you, okay, how much do you need to pay them to be able to hire them and retain them?
Mm.
Where do they live? What's the best way to market to them, right? The job postings. So a lot of people put these job postings for a forklift driver on
Mm,
Indeed, or they put it, online. And then what we find is like, well, actually, the most effective way to advertise a lot of these jobs is on Spotify, it's on Apple Music, and
mm.
you're
Interesting.
going to want run it in English, and you're going to want to run it in Spanish too.
Yeah.
Then it's just something that people don't think about when they're just going, "Hey, I got a cheap rate from this landlord."
We'll be back after a quick break.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Do you want more warehouse content delivered to your inbox? Sign up for our new email series called Warehouse Wisdom Wednesday to get an educational series of emails on warehouse basics delivered directly to you every Wednesday morning. Find the sign up link in the show notes. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't heard about advertising for warehouse labor on Spotify or Apple Music. I think that's pretty interesting there. If anybody wants to advertise on the New Warehouse podcast for labor, that might be a good idea. But
I think that's a great idea.
so very interesting. I mean, to see like that full kind of comprehensive look and that analysis, I think is so super smart and such a value add. I think as well. Aside from just finding a good lease rate, like you said there. What else are the factors that are involved in there, and what's that kind of almost total cost of ownership in a sense, which
Right.
I think, as we look at anything around the warehouse, whether it's inside or outside the warehouse, total cost of ownership needs to be considered to make sure that it's actually a smart buy and an efficient thing for the long term as well. So if we look at kind of the market, and you mentioned New Jersey, and I gave my New Jersey shout out because I'm here, I still see, a ton of new construction happening around me, especially in New Jersey. And as I've been traveling over the last couple months to a couple different cities for conferences and conventions, I still see a lot of new construction on warehouses as well. So I'm curious, I mean, how do you kind of advise people on looking at a greenfield new building versus like a brownfield old building? I mean, what's your thoughts there? And, how should somebody look at them side to side?
Usually, after we explain the entitlement process and timeline in
Mm,
Pennsylvania and New Jersey, nobody considers greenfield anymore
interesting.
because it takes 2 years to get a property entitled for a site plan. And that's assuming that it already has the proper industrial zoning in place that allows for warehousing and bulk distribution. So usually that just, people are like, oh, okay, I can't wait two
Yeah,
years
yeah.
just to get the land approved and then another 9 to 12 months for the building to get built, right? Very infrequently that somebody is that far out in their planning process. You would think corporate America would be good at it. They're actually not. Um,
Planning
but
is hard.
on the manufacturing side, that's when you do see it. Like when they know they need to add new plants for production capacity, it is planned very far out
Mm,
and they're very strategic of where they go. Most of that manufacturing, to be honest, does not come to New Jersey or Pennsylvania. It mostly goes to the Southeast
mm,
and to the South because they're right to work states and the manufacturers are trying to avoid unions.
yeah.
Some does come to the Northeast if there's a reason that they need particular natural resource or they're producing some foods that they want to be close to the end customer with, or just other like kind of idiosyncratic reasons. But on the warehousing side, you know most of what you see under construction is built on spec. It's
Right.
it's under construction on the concept of once its construction's complete, we're going to find a tenant. About typically about a third of that will get pre-leased
Mm,
and the landlord developer will find a tenant before construction's complete and the balance of that will be available afterwards. So usually my advice on the warehousing side is l- if it's regardless of if it's a renewal, if you have a renewal coming up, you still need to get out like way in advance of this, right?
mm,
Because typically in your lease with the landlord, you'll have like a 9 month or a year notification period that you have to give the landlord in advance whether or not you intend to renew. So that requires tons of upfront planning, right? Because if you do want to relocate,
Yeah.
you need to find the new location, and you need to match up all sorts of like equipment buying and network planning, all that around it, right? And if you come to landlord late in the process, they know that you haven't really done it. You lose all your leverage.
Mm.
But it's good to start early, I guess, would just be my overall message, because if you need something unique, you can sort of take these entitled sites, right, that are already approved,
Mhm.
or you can take something that's under construction and it sort of becomes a spec to suit, where you get a slight change to the entitlement plan, and then you get that, customized to be exactly to your specs.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Good advice there. And I think certainly that, as you mentioned, even like some of the largest corporations out there have a hard time planning. And I think planning is a challenging thing all
Yeah.
around. But like you said, I mean, it's good to get out in front of it and be able to, kind of be ahead of that. And I'm curious, I mean, around that kind of point there where you mentioned, typically there's like a 9 month type of notice. I mean, when somebody's looking at whether
Yeah.
they're going to renew or try to maybe move somewhere else, maybe to get a better deal, get a little more space, or different type of location, what are some of the, like kind of the tips there a little bit to maybe negotiate better on renewal, or what are some things to
Yep.
consider that people maybe often overlook or don't realize that they can potentially negotiate?
The worst thing that they can do is negotiate directly with the landlord and not use a tenant rep broker.
Mm.
If they do that, the landlord just knows that you're not leaving. Because if you were serious about looking at, alternative options, you would have a tenant rep broker engaged to be looking at those options and be running the survey and running the process for you.
Mm.
So if you go and you call, hey, Mr. XYZ landlord, hey, we might move, send us your most aggressive proposal. We're out of here.
Yeah.
You're not going to get their most aggressive proposal, and you're not even going to really know whether it's market, appropriate
Yeah.
or can be improved. Then you're not going to necessarily know what levers to pull, right? So the landlords, they're really interested in the value of their buildings, and the value of their buildings are predicated on the vacancy,
Mm.
the credit of the tenant, and the rate. But there's all these other concessions that you can get from them that don't impact the value of the building. So tenant improvements, you want, work done, new dock equipment, new lighting, upgrade your offices, upgrade your restrooms, blah blah blah. That's all negotiable, and the landlord's more likely to give you that stuff than they are rate, because that doesn't impact the value of the building.
Mm.
Same thing with free rent. You're going to take new space, like we can get major free rent periods, you know, talking like 6 months plus, depending on the
Oh,
lease
wow.
term you're doing. You can get free rent on renewals. So definitely use a tenant rep broker for negotiation. Number two, dude, if you're working with the broker that's the landlord's broker, so say, they have XYZ broker with the sign out front, and they're working on the renewal
Mhm.
between you and the landlord. That broker is only working on behalf of the landlord. Their goal is to get he or she the absolute best deal possible at the highest rate
Mm.
and worst terms for you, and to get you the absolute crappiest deal, because that's their job. That's what's
Yeah.
in their listing agreement with the landlord. In that instance, what you want to do is call a tenant rep broker to negotiate with that broker slash landlord, and to look alternative for you, even if you're just creating the optics of moving. It doesn't cost you anything, right? The tenant rep broker's fee is paid by the landlord, and it comes out of what their listing agent would get paid.
Mm.
So it's not, it's only benefiting you in every way.
Mm. Interesting.
I know
Yeah.
this sounds self-serving. I'll just full disclosure. I realize this sounds self-serving, but it's the God's honest truth.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, for people that don't know, I have my real estate license in New Jersey as well, but if always just focused on residential, and I think that's changing a little bit as we were talking before we went live here. But I think having somebody to represent you on your side and have your interest in mind is certainly the best way to go and be able to guide you through that process. I mean, like we mentioned, kind of in the beginning of the conversation, it's you're not leasing or buying property every week, right? It's not something that's like this frequently occurring transaction in most scenarios. So when you do that, you want to have an expert to be able to help you to navigate that for sure. So I think it's great. And even though it's self-serving, Eric here, I think it's definitely very good advice here as well. So Eric, I mean, it's very interesting to kind of hear about what's going on in the market in terms of whether it's looking for space or renewals and things of that nature that we talked so far. And I mentioned a little bit, and we talked a little bit about the new construction. And I'm curious to hear, because this came up in a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago, but when we look at new buildings and new construction for warehousing specifically, and we look and we see the landscape overall, we're seeing more and more technology come into our space, especially around automation and robotics. I saw like just this week, GXO announced that they're working with Aptronic, another humanoid robot application. But some of these, automation and robotics tools, I mean, they require some different types of things in the building, whether it's from like a power perspective or a height of the building perspective. Are you seeing that developers, I guess, especially from like a spec perspective, are they doing more with buildings to kind of help prepare to be ready for these type of technologies to come into play?
Yeah, absolutely. I think major evolution of warehousing over the past 20 years has been the growth in the clear height of the warehouses, right? So we talked about how for every dollar of real estate that gets spent, $10 is spent on transportation costs.
Mm,
So it behooves the companies to keep their inventory in their warehouses as close to the major population centers as possible and as close to the ports as possible, which means that's where the real estate is most expensive, right?
yeah.
So the by this increase in clear height, that's how we've got cubic efficiency, and that's how companies have kept this cost down, and landlords and institutional developers have gotten in front of that because they're aware they want to accommodate that. So that's driven the increase in clear height, right? So
Mm,
call it maybe 7, 8 years ago, right?
yeah.
8 years ago, something like that. People were building 32 clear, and that was that was the gold standard. And then 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, it was 36 clear, right?
Mm,
And now it's already pushing to 40 clear, and you see a lot of the new buildings that are being delivered. I would say probably a majority of them now are delivering at 40 clear because it's going up and up, right? Not everybody can utilize the full 40 clear because you have to have forklift drivers that can do 40 clear, and not every forklift driver can do that. But that's obviously been a big trend. So you've had the clear height increases. Now, power is the main thing that is needed for the automation, for the
mhm,
equipment, and also for the amount of data that these things are now running, right? So the power needs have increased a lot. That's been a challenge, right? Because that's also come at a time when, from COVID, there was a shortage of switch gears and transformer equipment and all that stuff, right? So there were problems where there were these warehouses that were delivered and they
yeah.
didn't have power because the utility couldn't serve them. They couldn't get the switchgear or the transformer there, right?
Mm,
But power is a big thing. Capacity. It's really everything's three phase now that gets built. So it's the amperage and tenants users they want more and more amperage. Some of these uses, particularly on the manufacturing side, they just need so much power, right? That's kind of a problem because it's not only the warehouses that need more power, but with this growth in data centers, right? And data centers chug power like crazy.
yeah.
So, and like even every home is using more IT, electronics, automation itself all the time. So the grid's just taxed. But so the warehouses, they need more power. When you're using finely tuned automation equipment and robotics, it's very precise. It's like precision. So it likes
Mm.
a very well controlled environment for HVAC, like humidity, heat, cool, and all that. And then it likes it extremely level floor or slab, especially on the manufacturing, precision manufacturing side. So, with ductile which is a material that you can pour, it's more of a premium material that you could pour your slab with. You have bigger sections of the slab that are flatter because you don't need to have the expansion joints. You don't need to have as many expansion joints because of the quality of the ductile crate. So it's really, the flatness, the power, good HVAC control environment, and clear height. Really, what I'd see the kind of the inside the box factors that accommodate and future proof for an automation standpoint. And then, you are seeing more EV charging infrastructure delivered with some of these new Class A buildings,
Uh,
EV for the trucking, right?
yeah.
It's been a little bit of a challenge because no one knows exactly how the truck wants to be charged when it gets there, what kind of hookup it's going to have, where they're going to want to charge, and all that. So, one of the strategies, if you're developing on spec, is you kind of just run the lines, for the conduit under the truck court. And then you just have like a place where you can put the charging infrastructure that no one's really putting like an actual, like EV go station there in advance of the truck because they don't know what that company's going to want, but they'll have it so the conduit's in the court and that, whatever box is going to go there can go there.
Gotcha. Yeah, super super insightful there, and I think that makes a lot of sense to be able to kind of future proof those buildings and think keep those things in mind. And I think the interesting too on the concrete there on the smooth floor, because I see David is in the audience here from Auto Store actually, so I'm sure he loves to hear about those smooth floors going in there for Auto Store installations. But yeah, I think doing that makes so much sense because you see, especially from a power perspective. I've been in a couple buildings where like there's not even like power drops at the dock doors and things like that. It seems like a value add that could be put in there by the developer or the landlord to make that building more appealing. But for some of that stuff, how could you go about as the tenant, like if you're looking to do some of those things and maybe they're missing from the building? How could you work with the landlord, or how do you negotiate something like that to maybe get them to cover some of the
Yeah.
cost to be able to do that?
So usually what we'll do is in the process of selecting the warehouse, right? So Kevin, you'll call me and you'll say, "Hey, Eric, we're going to need a 50,000 square foot warehouse in central, south, or North Jersey. We want to take occupancy in the first quarter of 2025. I need, XYZ components," right?
Hmm.
Say we find 7 buildings that are suitable. We're going to put a tenant improvement exhibit in our request for proposal.
Mm.
And in that tenant improvement exhibit, we're going to say all the things that we want. Some of these buildings might have that already in their base building. If they have it, great. They can just say, "Hey, already included in base building." If they don't, they're going to factor that into our proposal that when we come and we occupy that space, they're going to have done all that work. It's already going to be there, and they're either going to cover that in the base rent, or they're going to give us and cover the base rent. They're going to do it turnkey, or they're going to give us an allowance, right?
Mm.
And we can have them do that work, or we can have our contractor do that work. But that way, we cover off on all that stuff that we need exactly. Some things that you typically see in a tenant improvement work letter would be, as you mentioned, like quad outlets at all the dock doors, right?
Hmm.
Could be dock lights at all the dock doors, could be vehicle restraints. Those are, there's instances where some of the developers will put that in their spec-based building package, some of them won't.
Mm.
Nobody puts vehicle restraints in the spec package. Nobody builds vehicle restraints on spec. A lot of companies want them. A lot of tenants want them until they see the price and then they're like, we don't really need them, right? Um, And then other things, could be like drop outlets, expansion of the office area, construction of a shipping and receiving office, all sorts of things that can go into the TI work letter.
Interesting. So definitely options there, and obviously something that you can negotiate, as you're saying here. And I think
Yeah.
that's a great thing too, because I think even from the owner of the building's perspective, they're adding some of those things. I mean, it's going to be value add for them in the future, and so very interesting to talk to you here and learn about all of this stuff that's going on in the real estate market right now. I think Eric covered a ton of information here today, and very insightful information around the real estate market, specifically for warehousing. And I think it's a very, very important part of what we do, kind of a necessary evil maybe in a sense in some regard, but definitely we need these buildings to be able to do what we're doing in terms of moving product. And I think very interesting call out and important note and takeaway from this, I think for me, is certainly looking at that building and understanding just because the lease rate seems like a good deal, is not very much like the driving factor, right? As Eric pointed out, from an analytical standpoint, to be able to understand all of those different factors that are surrounding it, from the labor perspective, from the transportation perspective, to where your customers are, and all of those different things. So I love the analytical approach that Eric is taking, and Cressa is taking here as well. So if we're going to leave our audience with one big final tip for strategic negotiation, or what to think about when selecting a location, what would be that big tip that you would give them?
I would say the most important things you can do if you're running multiple locations is to use analytical network optimization to figure out where you should put your next location, or even if your current locations are the right spots, because where they are relative to each other and the ports and the customers and the price of the shipping lanes is going to have a major impact on your shipping costs and your transportation costs. And use a tenant rep broker.
All right, great two takeaways there. And if they need a tenant rep broker, I think we know somebody, Eric. Maybe?
Yeah. I'd love to work with you. We'd love to
What's
work
the
with
best
you.
way to get in touch with you, or learn more about Cressa?
I'd encourage you to go to our website, www.cressa.com. Great website and great company. You can learn all about us. Also, you can give me an email, ezonizer@cressa.com, or just shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I love to chat on LinkedIn and love to help people with their warehouse real estate needs.
All right, awesome. And I really appreciate Eric joining me this morning to talk all things warehouse real estate. So thank you once again, Eric, for joining me today. And thank you for those that tuned in, whether it's for a little bit or for the whole time. We really appreciate you hanging with us. And we'll be going live again next Tuesday. And we're trying to do this every Tuesday going forward. So thank you, everybody, for joining. And Eric, thank you once again. Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.